Yo! Hey everybody, this is Theoretical BS. And this is a video about tag, the transcendental argument for the existence of God. Sorry I've been away for so long. I apologize for that. I'll work on it. I made this video for Matt Slick, who, if you haven't heard of him, is one of the more prominent champions of this funny little argument nowadays. He's also the founder of CARM, the Christian Apologetics and Research Ministry, which has its own relatively new YouTube channel, one of the videos of which is Matt laying out the transcendental argument. Video link is on the right. This is not going to be a direct video response. I spoke to Matt and he said that he would not approve it on his channel because of the profanity in my username. What are you going to do? But he has agreed to watch it once I post it and hopefully respond. So, okay, so Matt, this whole argument is predicated upon the idea that you can account for logical absolutes and I can't. So the next thing that logically we should talk about is logic. Isn't that convenient? There's two things going on when it comes to logic, and a lot of people I notice make the mistake of treating them like they're the same thing, or at least confusing one thing with the other. Logic serves two different purposes. One is descriptive, and the other is prescriptive. Logic is descriptive of the universe, of existence. It's a representation of the way existence and all things that exist behave. It's a model of reality. It's descriptive, okay? Logic is also prescriptive for human beings. It instructs us on how to think and how to process in a way that matches reality. It prescribes principles to us so that we can govern our reasoning, so that we can arrive at more solid, better conclusions. The danger is when, whether we know it or not, we treat logic as if it's prescriptive for the universe, or reality, or existence, and it's not. The universe doesn't need a prescription for how to behave. It behaves the way it behaves. You take the law of non-contradiction, or the law of identity, and a lot of people think that it means that existence is being governed by laws, as if it were being told what to do. Not really. That's just an anthropomorphic expression we use. The behavior of existence isn't informed by logic. It informs logic, and logic in turn informs us. If anything, the law of non-contradiction is a law for us to help govern our thinking. Here's the thing about existence. Existence behaves consistently with itself. It just does. Things that exist reliably behave in a certain way, and they just don't behave another way. This is true of any philosophy, any worldview. You go back far enough and there's going to be a set of basic preconditions to existence that just behave the way that they do. As human beings, we've observed this. We're able to make accurate predictions based on this, and we've created a language for ourselves of symbols and structures that act as a representation of what we observe about the universe. Now there's a couple of objections that I can imagine you making at this point. Both would demonstrate a profound misunderstanding of my position, but why not? Let me just check in here. Now, I could see you, for one, doing maybe a premature victory dance because you heard me acknowledge that logic is man-made, right? And you're getting ready to give me the whole spiel about how anything man-made is subjective because human minds think differently and so on and so forth. Now, the last thing I want to do is underestimate you, but if you are going down that road, if you are thinking that, then you miss the point and you're not paying attention. Logic is man-made in either worldview. We're talking about the language, the process that we've created. The consistency of existence, however, that logic was created to represent is not man-made. Existence behaves the way that it does independently of our consciousness or our perceptions, and it's thus not subjective. It is outside of ourselves. We can all observe it. We can all see the same thing. It's not just our opinion. Now, another thing you might be thinking on, riding the coattails of that is that observation isn't good enough, right? You might try and argue that since we are subjective beings, we can only observe the universe from one tiny little perspective and therefore aren't in a position of claiming that logical absolutes are in fact absolute. How would we know, right? Simply observing the universe and the consistency of existence doesn't justify us in putting stock in the law of non-contradiction, for example, because you'd need infinite knowledge in order to falsify it. And that's true. That's totally true. But if you think that's a legitimate objection to my worldview and not yours at the same time, then you're still missing the point. Because even if we assume the truth of Christianity, we're still in the same boat. Because remember, Matt, your worldview doesn't equip you to demonstrate that the law of non-contradiction, for example, is true. You can try and make the claim that logical absolutes can be accounted for by positing a God, but nothing about Christianity aids you in proving that the law of non-contradiction is one of those absolutes. Nothing in Scripture says that something can't be both A and not A at the same time. Nothing in the physical universe you believe God created verifies the law of non-contradiction. It's still a tautology, and it still has to assume its own truth in order to work. That's one of the liabilities of using logic. This is true of any and all logical principles, including the law of identity and the law of excluded middle, two other favorites of yours I've noticed. When it comes to identifying logical absolutes, you're in no better of a position than I am. And you, as well, have to rely on mere subjective observation. The best you can do is maintain that logical absolutes exist and that God is their source, but it wouldn't put you any closer to knowing with certainty what those absolutes are. When you say that theism accounts for logical absolutes, all you're saying is that if God existed, logical absolutes would be a reflection of his consciousness. But conveniently, Matt, you leave it at that, and you hope that I will too. However, it's pretty easy to call your bluff only by pointing out that God's consciousness, of which logical absolutes are a mere reflection, is itself unaccounted for by your worldview. You believe that the most default natural state of existence is that there is this emotionally and intellectually intricate consciousness you call God, and that this consciousness just is, and just is the way it is for no reason, with no cause. You can't account for why God exists instead of not existing. You can't account for why God has the traits and qualities he has instead of other traits and qualities. You can't account for why God's will is effective instead of ineffective or partially effective. Your beliefs about God render you unable to account for any aspect of God's consciousness or existence. So to say that logical absolutes aren't accounted for in my worldview, only to turn around to say that they are in yours because they are a reflection of something that is itself unaccounted for, well, that's just silly, don't you think? You drew a comparison more than once in your video between atheists accounting for logical absolutes and Christians accounting for God, and I was glad to see you do that because it demonstrates an understanding on your part that double standards won't fly here. Let me read to you something you said. You said, if the atheist says that logical absolutes just are, then he's still failing to give an account. Atheists object to Christians saying the same thing when they say that God just exists. So why should we accept a non-answer from an atheist who says that logic just is? You also said this. If the atheist doesn't need to give an account for logical absolutes, then he shouldn't complain if I were to say I don't need to give an account for God's existence. Well, Matt, for once I agree with you. But the thing is, I'm not the one complaining. That is to say, I'm not the one making the argument that things like God's existence or logical absolutes need to be accounted for in order for a worldview to be valid. You see, I wouldn't try to argue that theism isn't defensible unless you can fully account for God's existence and qualities, because I understand that no matter which worldview one subscribes to, there will always be, if you go back far enough, if you peel enough layers away, a set of basic preconditions to existence that have to be assumed that just are what they are. In mine, it's what you're calling logical absolutes, and in yours, it's God's existence and qualities and nature. But that's me. You have made your position very clear, and now I'm going to hold you accountable to your conclusions. You strongly maintain that for my worldview to be defensible, I would need to account for logical absolute. That means that you also strongly maintain that for your worldview to be defensible, you would need to account for God's existence and qualities and nature. Watch this, neat little trick. I'm just going to take those two statements of yours I read a second ago and interchange the key words. If the Christian says that God just is, then he's still failing to give an account. Further, if the Christian doesn't need to give an account for God's existence, then he shouldn't complain if I were to say I don't need to give an account for logical absolutes. Your reasoning, not mine. So, let's hear it, Matt. How do you account for God's existence? I'm going to close out, and I'm going to close out by paraphrasing a quote from somebody that I know you hold in very high regard. He said, "Do not concern yourself with a speck of sawdust in your neighbor's eye when you have yet to remove the log from your own."